Sci-Fi Show Outcast. Welcome to Sci-Fi Show Outcast 38. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Today we have an interview with Cory Doctorow, author, technologist, all-around wearer of many hats, and punchline of XCD jokes. So, let's get on with the interview. Thank you very much for joining us on the Sci-Fi Show today, Cory Doctorow.
My pleasure.
So, first up, can you tell me a bit about yourself, who you are and what your background is?
Well, I'm a science fiction writer from Canada, and presently I live in Los Angeles, and I used to live in London, and before that in San Francisco, and before that in Central America. I worked for some years as a copyright activist for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, a nonprofit civil rights group, and these days I'm pretty much a full-time writer and blogger. I earn some of my living this year on a Fulbright chair at the University of Southern California, which is why I'm in Los Angeles and why I'm presently poring over miles and mounds of paperwork trying to figure out how to reconcile 3 different tax systems.
Is that as much fun as it sounds?
Less.
Fair enough.
Substantially less. And you just try and find an accountant who knows both British and American and Canadian taxes. It is madness.
Okay, so where do you get your story ideas from when you're writing? If there's any particular place, anyway.
I'm tempted to say that I order them from a post office box in Schenectady, which is, as a dues-paying member of the Science Fiction Writers of America, I think I'm actually obliged to say. But I tend to arrive at stories by a process of kind of slow bricolage. I find little bits and pieces of the world that seem to be parts of a story that I want to tell, and I put them on the weblog I co-edit on Boing Boing. And then over time, those pieces all seem to gel into a puzzle. So a lot of them seem to be bits of sky, but every now and again you get a corner.
Oh, okay, I see. So where did the idea for Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom come from?
Well, any number of places, really, because there's more than one idea there. Napster certainly inspired a great deal of it, and, that was the era of the golden age of Napster when we were building the largest library of human creativity ever assembled and confronting at the same moment and for the same reason the end of scarcity for a good that had previously been scarce. And so that seemed like a rich and fruity flavor for me to be looking into. It was also had the singular advantage of allowing me to write about a place that I loved, Walt Disney World, and to write off my taxes, this will be a theme today, to deduct from my taxes my trips to Disney parks.
Okay, really interesting story. Is this is the future that's portrayed in Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom something you look forward to?
No, I don't write about the future. I write about the present. I think that any science fiction writer who tells you he's writing about the future is full of... I think that science fiction writers can't help but write about the present. And some of them do it deliberately and some of them do it accidentally, but that's what we all end up writing about. There was a great story on the Escape Pod podcast this week. It was an old Silverberg story that was from the 60s or maybe the 70s. And it was a great story, but it told you a whole lot more about the 1960s than about the 2000s that it was predicting. And I think that that's universally true of science fiction.
Okay. So how is Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom written now, in effect? It seemed to be set in the future with...
Right, sure, but it wasn't meant to be predictive of the future. It was supposed to be a little parable about how the internet organizes itself, what things are like in a world where things both have terrible consequences and no consequences, which seems to often be the case on the internet, where the actual tangible consequences are minimal, but where the consequences are nevertheless quite heated for those who are involved in them. How amusement or entertainment can become the thing that you care about more than anything else, and how ultimately the hardest thing to do is to overcome the coordination costs of getting a bunch of people to cooperate with you. I don't think that that's super novel. I think that, since we came out of the not maybe since we came out of the trees, but at least since we came out of their solitary trees. Once we became social monkeys, we became very concerned with what all the other monkeys were doing. which makes a certain kind of sense because, it was evolutionarily sensible for us to become social monkeys. That meant that some of us could watch the kids while the other ones gathered fruit and more, looked out for predators. But it also opened up the possibility that one or more monkeys would arrive at the strategy of doing bugger all with his thumb up his ass and eating the fruit that the rest of us gathered. And so as a result, we had to be on our guard for what all the other monkeys were doing, and we developed this kind of in-wired, completely irrational phobia of free riding, and it just became kind of our leitmotif, if you will, as a species. And so, I think that played out on the internet has become very interesting to watch how people worry about whether or not your RSS feed is being put on someone else's web page or whether your work is being appropriated without credit and so on. Even when it costs you nothing, there's a feeling of fairness or unfairness that I think has that as its origins. And so that had something to do with Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom too. Ultimately, it was a story about the world as we lived in, not the world that we might be entering.
Okay. Can I ask, what is Woofy?
Woofy, well, so Woofy is a reputation currency, and it's a reputation currency used in this notional fictional world that I created. It's basically how your peers feel about you at any given time, so whether they're positively disposed to you or negatively disposed to you. And if you have lots of woofy, you can get lots of opportunities to earn more woofy. So in other words, you might be able to walk into a restaurant and be seated very quickly because you are held in esteem by your friends, and the maitre d' knows one or more of your friends and can determine just by looking at you how much woofy he should accord to you based on how much accord he has for people who hold you highly. You also might be able to sit down at that same restaurant at a table that the maitre d' hasn't shown you to and declare yourself the new maitre d'. And if the servers determine that you have enough woofy that it's in their interest to pay attention to you instead of the maitre d', you become the maitre d' just by dint of being more reputable than he is. And, that's not so far off, I think, from the way that the world works too. Some people have characterized this as a meritocracy or what have you, a reputation economy. I actually think it shares a lot of the same problems as the contemporary world. It is a Goduncan experiment, not a manifesto.
Okay. Just for anyone that doesn't know, what is a Goduncan experiment?
It's a German word.
Okay.
It's a German word that means a thought experiment.
Now, do you look forward to a future where you can download your mind and back yourself up like is suggested in the story?
Well, again, I think this is about the contemporary world, not about the future world. I don't know whether or not... I think that it is somewhat conceited to say that we're so transcendently complex that we can't be simulated inside of a machine, particularly one of the marvelous universal machines that we call computers. On the other hand, it does seem like right now that seems to be increasingly intractable. Very, very hard thing for us to think of. Every time we think we're making a step forward, we seem to take a step back. So I don't really think too much about it as a potential activity, but I do think that more and more we project our consciousness into computers, and that more and more, because we are essentially life blogging as we go, everything we do there's some kind of electronic record, either explicit or implicit, whether it's your Google search history or the blog post you made or the email you sent, and that is slowly being bound together both by the surveillance society and by ourselves as we look to understand more about our own habits so that we can be better people, that we do have backups of ourselves in a certain sense.
Oh, okay, I see. The surveillance society?
Absolutely. Yeah, you've got it in John Howard country, and we've got it here in George Bush country, and it's certainly in Tony Blair country too. We increasingly have decided that the solution to all of our problems is to watch everything and record everything and know what everyone is saying and thinking at any given time, and that if we only attend to enough fine details of people's behavior, we'll eventually be able to predict all the bad deeds that someone might someday engage in. And yet, at the same time, the feeling is that this will only have positive effects on our behavior, that we'll never, as a result of being universally and continuously surveilled, behave worse, that the only effect that it'll have on our behavior is to encourage us to be better citizens because we know we're being watched and recorded. It will make us accountable. I think that this is, of course, a fallacy, and that, anyone who lived in, say, Soviet-occupied East Berlin knew this, that having a snitch society where everyone is watching everyone else does not, in fact, encourage you to be a better citizen.
True enough. Now, in terms of the surveillance society, you worked for the Electronic Frontiers Foundation. What's your take on privacy and things like that? Particularly with, I mean, the government might be watching us, but there's also, certainly on the internet at least, we're being watched by advertisers and corporations and the like. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that we behave differently and not better when we're surveilled. I think that there is a certain freedom that you get when you are free from surveillance, a freedom of thought and a freedom of conviction, and a freedom to experiment and a freedom to do better. If you've ever, tried to learn how to drive from, say, a parent who sat there beside you, watching every move that you made and telling you when you got it wrong, you know what that's like. I mean, you can learn a lot more and do a lot more if you are free from surveillance, if the only person who's keeping track of what you're doing is you, than you can if there are other people watching what you do. And I think that we need to embrace technological tools that help us shake off surveillance. And increasingly we have better and better tools like, say, Tor, the onion router, which helps you remain anonymous on the internet, and so on.
What's your take on the way the world's organized? When you look out at the world, what do you see? Is it just matter or something else, or
doesn't matter?
Well,
I'm a materialist, if that's what you're asking. I mean, there may be things that transcend the material plane. There probably are things that transcend materialism as we know it. But I think that they can be empirically inspected and known better through empiricism.
Okay. So, what do you make of things like religion and stuff like that?
Generally, I think of them as largely harmless, but always baseless, rarely beneficial, and an unfortunate artifact of another evolutionary moment. David Byrne actually had a little essay that made a lot of sense to me once. He said, imagine that you're some distant ancestor of ours chasing antelopes, and you keep not catching them, and as a result, you keep on going hungry, and so you've missed your third antelope for the day, and it's time to either get back on the horse or run off and die, and you've got to decide what to do. And if you believe that there's a higher power that might reward you for your virtue in chasing the fourth antelope instead of acknowledging that having missed the first three antelopes, it's almost certain that you'll miss that fourth one, there's a chance that you'll catch the fourth antelope and therefore get a meal into you and therefore survive and therefore have more babies. And so evolutionarily, we are the product of innumerable ancestors who decided that chasing antelopes was a good thing to do because God wanted them not to go hungry, and as a result, we are disposed to believing in the spiritual.
Okay, so you're an author. What sort of books are you working on at the moment, or are you working on any books at the moment?
I am, in fact, just finishing up the ending of a novel whose title is still up in the air. It will probably be called either Homeland or Patriot Acts, and it will be a novel about, or it is a novel about hacker kids who declare war on the Department of Homeland Security in the United States and who use technology to break Homeland Security measures. And it's described in enough detail that you can read the book and find out how to break Homeland Security measures yourself.
So we should look forward to seeing you disappear in the middle of the night sometime soon?
Well, I have counsel who said that they'll take care of me if that's what it comes to.
Fair enough. So, where do you stand politically on the political spectrum? Is that too general a question?
It's a pretty general question. I was raised by Marxists, but I'm not myself a Marxist. I'm generally speaking, I think it's fair to call me, say, a liberal Democrat. Someone who believes in socializing those things that society won't do for itself. It believes that it's our responsibility to take care of our neighbors and also in our self-interest to take care of our neighbors.
Okay. Not a big fan of the free market then?
No, I am a big fan of the free market. I don't think that those are at all contradictory. I think that there are things that a market can't do, and we should resolve those with social intervention. And there are things that markets are very good at that we should embrace, but that to just blindly follow one or the other, I think is wrong. I don't believe in planned economies, but I do believe in using social measures to socialize those costs that benefit the society as a whole. And I do believe in strong regulation to call companies to account for those externalities they impose on the rest of us. But, for example, do I think that the state? I don't think that, for example, the state should intervene to ensure that last year's music industry is preserved in perpetuity. I think that's the kind of thing that where I am a free marketeer.
Okay, so what do you make of something like the DMCA? Is this a bad idea, or seeing as we seem to be getting it here in Australia?
Yeah, well, I think it's proven itself to be a pretty bad idea. It has yet to accomplish its nominal goal of reducing illicit copying, nor has it enriched any artists, although it has enriched a few companies that got huge windfalls out of it. And at the same time, it's had a terrible social cost. It's had a large cost against innovation. It's cost us a lot of research and development that people might have otherwise engaged in had they not been afraid of going to jail or being tried for infringing on copyright or for circumventing a copying measure. This is not just speculative. This is something that we know from top universities in this country, that students in technical programs and their advisors are reluctant to pursue areas of research where they are likely to come up against the Digital Millennium Copyright Act because they're unsure that they'll be on the right side of the law. I think it's also had a terrible effect on people who have been brave enough to publish their research. I mean, this country sent a scientist to jail for talking about math. I think that's an embarrassment.
I'd agree with you there. So, if you think the DMCA is a bad way to go, and that it's, well, I get the impression that you think it's mainly record companies trying to protect their revenue streams. What do you think would be the right...
movie companies too.
Oh, well, yeah. What do you think would be the right way forward for them? Instead of approaching it with the club of legality?
To a certain extent, I actually don't much have any opinion about what they should do because I'm not in their line of work. I don't think it's my responsibility to figure out how the movie industry should conduct itself. I think that it should be legitimate for someone to say, I don't know what the answer is to your problems, but it's not shafting me. I think that's actually a pretty fair thing to say. That said, I think that we do have both film and record and music companies and entrepreneurs who are doing good work, and they're doing it without having to have special favors from the government. And an example of that would be the Creative Commons music labels, my own publishing ventures with Creative Commons, independent filmmakers who are making movies cheaper than ever before and using the internet to distribute them and selling access to streams or to downloads but without any anti-copying technology involved. In other words, just kind of figure it out, try a million things, just don't make one of those things criminalizing the majority of internet users.
Fair enough. So, the Creative Commons, did you have any input on the creation of that, or you're just a user like everyone else?
A little bit. I actually was good friends with the people who designed the initial system, so I had some input into how the first license creation interface would go. But I was hardly the designer or anything, and I wouldn't lay claim to that. Some very talented and dedicated people did that, and I was glad to see it emerge. I was lucky enough to see Larry Lessig talk about Creative Commons at a number of technical conferences leading up to the launch, so mostly O'Reilly conferences.
Okay, so you make use of the Creative Commons. I presume you like it then. What do you think its strengths are?
Well, I think that its biggest strength is that it's trivial to understand. Once you get your head around the idea, which is not a big idea to get your head around, it's easy to use and it's easy to convey what it means, and it works globally. Copyright has the same exclusive rights and privileges for creators all over the world, but it has novel and distinctive restrictions on users all over the world, users of information. And it's that disharmony that makes it very hard for us to collaborate across great distances using the network, because the rights that you have as a user of information are different from the rights that I have as a Canadian user of information living in the United States. And so I think that Creative Commons goes some way to harmonizing user rights, and that's very important.
Okay. So one final question. If people want to learn more about your work, where's a good place to go?
Well, craphound.com is where all my personal stuff is, and I write on boingboing.net every single day. So you can go to either one or both.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time today, Cory Doctorow.
Not at all. Absolutely my pleasure. Thanks.
Well, I hope everybody enjoyed that conversation with Cory Doctorow as much as I did. If you'd like to discuss anything found in that interview, come over to the sci-fi-show.com, and that's Phi with a PH, and you participate in our forums. And stay tuned for more regular sci-fi shows coming up in the near future. We're going to be looking at all sorts of interesting topics to do with identity, immortality, and technology. Talk to you later. The Sci-Fi Show is copyright Jason Rennie, 2006. It's released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivative license, and the song Big Planet is used by permission of Nova Surfer. More great Nova Surfer tracks can be found at novasurfer.nl.